Welcome back, my friends, for episode 26 of Beyond Bricks and Mortar. Now, today I'm joined by friend and client, Mike Lisovetsky. Now, Mike is a born and bred entrepreneur. This guy has been founding and running companies since he was a teenager. He's 31 years old, and in this conversation, we go deep into his mind, where I ask him a lot of questions that relate to just everyday life as an entrepreneur, how you make decisions, how you overcome failure, and how you define success. Now, with real estate being an entrepreneurial endeavor as well, I felt like I related a lot to this journey, which excites me because I believe this audience will retain a tremendous amount of value listening to this conversation. As always, I'm very excited for you to listen and watch this one. And if you are new here, welcome. New episodes of Beyond Bricks and Mortar are every single Wednesday, so make sure to hit that like and subscribe, all the buttons. But now, without any further ado, here he is, Mike Lisovetsky. It's nice to see you after all this time. It's been some time.
It's been some time. I think it's been over a year.
Yeah. I think you were probably like the busiest guy I know. I mean, of course, there's like Ryan Serhant, but there's, like when you and I were working together, you were always dialed in. Always. Do you find that that's still the case?
Yeah, I think it just naturally end up drowning myself in work. And I've been actually looking for slightly more balance, but yeah. I think I've come to value output and not just doing as many things.
Right.
And I've also come to value focus.
Yeah.
Like if I have to think about how my perspective has shifted over the last decade, it's been just valuing focus and the benefit of focus.
Yeah, I hear that. And well, you're getting married on Sunday. So
yes.
Your focus is naturally going to shift a little bit.
Yes. And I think with that, my calculus shifted too, in terms of like risk and how I think about risk and how I think about upside and all these things.
Yeah. Well, you're still in a position where taking risk is not the worst thing. Before you have kids is the time to take as much risk as possible.
Exactly.
Once you start lining up tuition payments and really having to worry about all that stuff, risk becomes a little less sexy.
Yep. It's what's become interesting, at least like my philosophy from my 20s, and I forget where I picked this up, but it was I will do as much as I can because of this idea of compounding experience and compounding knowledge, and the more that I could do and compress into a shorter timeline, the more experience I'll have, and that'll kind of build on itself, and I'll have more skills. So I was just trying to do everything, and I would just try to say yes to everything. And I think that served me to an extent. And then now I'm 31, so I entered my 30s, and I'm like, okay, what does the next decade look like?
Yeah.
Because that includes a wife and kids and like family, and that is a little bit of a shift. So I would say I still love taking risks, but I think I've just become more intentional in how I do it.
Yeah, the focus is a little more directional.
It's directional, and I like to pause and be like, all right, is this actually lining up to what I want? Is this a good investment of time?
Yeah. Well, the fact that you're 31 is probably the most interesting thing about this conversation because you've had a long career already.
Technically, yes.
Yeah, technically a very long career. In fact, you have been doing this since you're a teenager.
I have.
Let's start with this. You do have a long history in entrepreneurship. You co-founded Juice, a performance-based digital growth and marketing agency. You also co-founded a lot of other companies like Skylight, BuilderBuzz, Live Applicant, Peachy, Realty Capital. And you've been launching companies since you're a teenager.
Yes. Not a co-founder of Realty Capital. I wish I was. They're doing super well.
Was it a partner?
Yeah, we're like small partners. We came in and we did help them build from the ground up, though.
I've utilized their services many times. I'm a fan. I like the way they deploy their service.
Yeah, thankfully they're doing super well. I mean, but it's really interesting that you touch on that because it's a very different approach to business. Mm-hmm. Briggs and Dan, they just have so many years of real estate experience.
Yeah.
And they had a very clear vision, and it was a very simple vision, which is how do you help agents normalize their incomes a little more and reduce the lumpiness. And in the beginning, I was like, okay. I was just skeptical. I was like, where could this really go? And it's just been amazing just to watch it evolve and watch there's like a really amazing demand that comes from it. People are really happy from it.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show how sometimes it's, like there are too many ways. Like in the startup world, the perspective is like, oh, just try it and get a bunch of feedback. But that level of intentionality can work as well.
Yeah.
Like coming in with a crystal clear vision and then working towards it actually can work.
Well, I find that they really understand real estate agents, which is why they're as patient as they are, as flexible as they are. everything's a conversation. It's not black and white. It's not binary the way they do business. They understand that our world is very unpredictable, which makes me comfortable in my interactions with them. Like, it's almost like they deploy a certain element of hospitality in the work, which makes it comfortable for me to work with them to the point where I'm not even reading the contracts anymore. So it's nice.
They've done a great job. It's been amazing just to see that. And what I love about an opportunity like that is I'm not directly involved in real estate, but I get to learn so much, and it just like expands their horizon so much, and just being like a fly on the wall, or just understanding the agent perspective, understanding the perspective of like even from the cash flow or whatever it is. But it really like helps round out my understanding of the industry.
Yeah, well, I think it's necessary. It's hard to wait for your check, especially as you go further in life and more expenses rack up. You need quicker access to capital. Now, naturally, being an entrepreneur, it comes with a tremendous amount of trial and error, a tremendous amount of failure, and moments in time where life and success seem impossible. So my first question to you is, how do you overcome failure to see through with confidence that you're in the right place and that you're doing the right thing?
For me, it was a lot of reps. So my perspective very early on was like, all right, the more that I could do this, the more comfortable I'll get. And then it was getting used to the idea of failure. I think that the culture and startups and entrepreneurship, I think, has kind of become whereas failure has become too glorified. Like it's gone a little bit in the other direction. And my perspective was always like, I'm just going to keep trying. I don't have much to lose. That made it a lot easier. And I'm just going to learn as much as I can. And it still hurts. It's never just an easy process. But when you're able to sit there and kind of like look for what you could take away from it, take the lessons, and then move forward, that's really when it helps. Yeah. And eventually, just frankly, once it happens enough times, like you get punched in the face enough times, it's different. Like you become desensitized.
You become resilient, a lot more resilient.
You start building resilience. Yep.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like I know a lot about that because real estate just comes with a tremendous amount of failure all the time. 90% of deals just don't happen.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know it for sure, but it's probably why most people fail out. Like, don't most agents fail out?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons, a couple of schools of thought there with respect to how the industry is really a revolving door. People are always entering and then quickly exiting. I think a part of that is just that we do a good job of glorifying the business, making it look really fun, cool, and easy, but no one really sees what goes into it, what it takes to really succeed. And another thing is that, it's really, really hard to build a sustainable business. It takes years. to really do it. And most people think it's going to be a much more accelerated timeline. So like when I look back, it took me 5 years to start making real money in real estate. And I think, I could have done a few things better and smarter, like joining a team early on and getting the mentorship I needed to accelerate my success. And I think that's why I've chosen to become the leader I am with my team, is to really help. Like my mission as a leader is to accelerate my team's success by helping them fall in love with the work, I think also another thing is that people come into real estate and they want to do it in a binary or formula-based way, like they see in the content or on the TV. But the reality is that real estate is a business, especially selling homes. It's a business you have to do in alignment with the thing that you really love, like the thing you're really most passionate about. Like I love creativity and hospitality, being the bridge between those two worlds and deploying that in my work. I have a member of my team who's in the dog treat business. And I try to explain to her that by building your dog treat business, you are going to build your real estate business. Like if you're in the park, striking up conversation with people who are walking their dogs and giving them free treats, that's the moment in time you have an opportunity to create a connection,
I think you actually hit a number of interesting points there. It's entrepreneurship as well. It's very much glorified. Like it looks cool. It looks like a lot of fun. And it is when you're winning. When you're succeeding, it's the best thing in the world.
Same thing in real estate.
Yeah, but the problem is, or really the truth is that most of the time you're not winning. And it's the number of times you're at bat. You just got to keep trying.
Yeah.
And most people, they don't have the wherewithal. And I was actually, that reminds me, that's actually why I wanted you to sell my apartment. Thankfully you did very quickly. Is because of your creative perspective. Like I thought the creativity is exactly what the best formula was to sell a unique apartment. And recently I was telling someone a story about that. Like I had it and then I got it during COVID and I couldn't live in it. And they're like, wow, that's so discouraging. Like, how did you keep going? I was like, I was just shocked that someone would think I was like, if that was
that
discouraging,
was easy for you.
Oh my God. Then I realized, that just gives me perspective. For a lot of people, they seek out comfort, which is natural. Like, people want comfort. They want stability. They just want to do the thing that they know or that comes easily. And at the same time, like, it sounds so good. It sounds so appealing to be able to go and build a business and be self-reliant and kind of not have a ceiling and only work for yourself. It's really hard.
Yeah, you have to cancel comfort because it's not comfortable.
Yes.
It's not comfortable to do what you do, to do what I do, to succeed at it. It's just not.
Not at all.
Yeah. Speaking of the time that we worked together, when we did work together to sell your home, oftentimes you were home during our marketing development sessions or random appointments as needed. Once in a while you had to be home for calls or whatever it is you were dealing with. I couldn't help but do a little eavesdropping on some of those calls and video conferences you were on. It seemed that you didn't have a single free minute in your day. How do you balance all the different things that you do? Because you as an entrepreneur, you do many different things. And how do you sort of harmonize your work with your personal life?
For me, it's work-life integration. Like, people always say work-life balance. I've never had that. I don't know what that's like. I don't know. I don't enjoy it. Like, I love what I do. And I think at the end of the day, like, you have to love what you do, which is a little bit cheesy and a little bit cliche. But it all, like, what I've realized also is, like, cliches come from a kernel of truth. Like, they're coming from somewhere.
Of course, they're cliches for a reason.
Exactly, they keep happening. But you have to love what you do. And for me, I love it. So therefore, there's work-life integration. And what that practically means is, like, a lot of my friends are also entrepreneurs, or my fiance is very entrepreneurial and she loves it. She's working on a side project right now. Like, I'm helping her with it. So it's finding ways to integrate that. And then for a while I had an EA, right now I don't. It's just, for me, it's very much schedule management. Like, a very practical thing would be just time blocking. Like, I think time blocking is a complete game changer. Committing to very specific time blocks on your calendar for specific things that you have to do, and then honoring those and actually following through. Yeah. And then, of course, calls. Right now I'm doing, like, the biggest change that I've made recently is no call days. So, like, Tuesdays and Thursdays, I try to avoid calls. I try to avoid meetings. And I call them, like, actually do work days, because I feel like when I'm on back-to-back calls, it's so hard to actually get something done. Yeah. Sure, things may be moving forward or things may be being delegated, and maybe there's some new business coming in, but then, of course, there's the work. So, and ultimately it boils down to, how do you find the right people around you? Like, for me, I'm very fortunate. I have an amazing team. Yeah. I've learned what doesn't work. I've learned, unfortunately, like, who maybe is not a fit. That's been a very valuable lesson. But over time, it's building that team. It's building that support structure. It's building the structure, whether it's of the organization or of the people, of the talent that you work with.
Yeah, I hear that. And I think you touched on something really important. Well, and it's another cliche, but a cliche for a reason. You really do have to love what you do. And I think I struggled with this for a little bit in my real estate career, and that was kind of balancing the love I had for this work, for selling homes, specifically selling homes. Real estate and selling homes is two different conversations, I find. But there's also, like, the creativity and the creative world that I love, and wanting to deploy that in other places, like hospitality, in that world. I love that world, or just being a person that helps provide people with creative strategy to excel in whatever they're doing. And I was trying to figure out, like, how do I balance these two worlds? How do I make time for both things? And I was talking to someone who said to me, you don't balance two things that you love. You don't. You harmonize them. You make them work together.
Absolutely.
And it was kind of like that moment in time, I had this very clear and vivid vision. It was like a tank of water with a wall in the middle of it. And then you had, like, red water on one side, blue water on the other. And all of a sudden, like, the wall lifted and the colors collided, and it was purple, which is, like, my favorite color.
Exactly.
And it's like, that was a real moment of realization for me, or like a moment of consciousness. And I was like, wow. That's really what it is. It's just, that's what I mean when I say, like, a business like real estate, you have to do it in alignment with really who you are and what you love. That's how you're going to succeed in it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's to your point about the dog treat company, but there are many people that succeed in real estate in all these unique ways. Yeah. Because it is all about harmonizing it and bringing it in, and, like, what is the context? What makes you unique? who it's because people often get stumbled over this idea of like, who do you know? And like, you have to know people. Sure. So go meet them.
Right, but you also can't, like, if you just enter the business, you can't reasonably expect even your family members to give you their listings and trust you with their business. That's unfair to expect that. It's like these are assets that they've worked super hard to obtain. It's a very emotional process to buy and sell homes, and for them to just trust you with it, of course, like, you expect that sort of connection element to take you home, but you have to be reasonable in understanding that you can't expect to just be handed that. You have to earn it. You have to earn it, no matter what the context is, whether it's family or otherwise, of course. What are some of the everyday principles and philosophies you like to live by that help keep you in the fight?
I mean, that's a great question. I think that for me, the philosophy has always been integrity, and am I acting within integrity?
Well, integrity is big, especially if you're keeping, like you said, keeping to time blocks and, keeping to that schedule of no call day. Like, that's all integrity based.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the big one is my word is my bond, and I do my best to keep my word at any point.
Yeah.
And it's integrity. It's like it's tough too, because as an entrepreneur, you might not always succeed, whether it's within client work or it's like you raise money. Like, not all companies succeed. So what you can control, though, is did you act with an integrity?
Yeah.
It's like what I like to focus on is like what is within my control, and I like to admit what's not in my control, and that's what kind of keeps me sane. Because of course, like, we could do it with juice. We can try our hardest, and we can bring a product to market, and there might not be a market there. Like people just might not be as excited to buy it. And when you're doing marketing, even if you do everything right, if there's not that buyer demand, it might not sell.
Yeah.
So the only thing we could do is act within integrity and try our best.
Yeah, being mindful of what you can control is a good one. It's like, for example, I'm a very spiritual person, and we're supposed to believe that all of our blessing and all of our success comes from above. But we're not, like it's written in the text, we're not supposed to lean back with that belief and be like, okay, it'll come to me if it's meant to be. We're actually supposed to put in the effort. You're supposed to do everything that you can do. Judaism teaches us to work hard.
Absolutely.
And, it's only then, after you've put in the work, that you can lean back and say, if it's meant to be, it will be. And that's like really like what I define as the difference between what you can and what you cannot control.
No, absolutely. It reminds me of that joke that I'm going to butcher, but it's the idea that somebody was stranded on an island, and he's like, God, send me a raft or save me. And then
I know this. This is
like a
one.
raft, and all these things go by, and then eventually he drowns or dies or whatever. And he asks God, like, why didn't you save me? And he's like, I sent you all these things. You didn't do anything.
Yeah, I sent you a boat. I sent you a helicopter. You didn't jump on.
No, that's the one. And that's, it really goes back to this idea of agency.
Yeah.
Which I think
What is the idea of agency?
That's a good point. So this idea of agency, this idea of what is within your control and what's not. So when you have high agency, it means that you believe that more things than not are within your control. You believe that more things than not that you can actually affect through your actions, through your thoughts. And low agency is when life just happens to you.
Yeah.
So it's like, I caught a bad break, or I'm having a bad day, or it's raining, so I have a headache, or whatever it is. Like all these things happen. It's not because you're hungover because you drank too much. It's because it's raining.
Yeah.
So it's just like for me, I think it's very important to like work with high agency individuals and be as high agency, and then take ownership for what I do, for how I approach it to the best of my ability.
I want to ask you about intuition as it relates to entrepreneurship. When we were about to go into contract with the first buyer that came to your apartment, you asked me a question like right before you signed, right before your hand strode on the dotted line. You asked me specifically, have you ever heard of the sunk cost fallacy? At that moment, I didn't. I never heard of it, but I looked it up, and it said that it's our tendency to follow through on something that we already invested heavily in, whether it's time, money, effort, or emotional energy, even though we know that giving up is probably the better idea. So I said no, and you said, okay, well, I'll sign, but I was curious. So I said, okay, I really racked my brain, and then
I'm very impressed that you remember that.
And then it turned out that you were right. You were right. Something in there told you that this deal was no good, because the buyer couldn't close in the end, and they
Yeah, it
dragged
didn't
their
work
feet.
out.
Yeah, it didn't work out. It's clear that you had an intuition that I couldn't see in that moment, even as someone who had been doing this for 10 years already by the time we worked together. So would you say that you have a unique intuition that has helped you in business?
I had to discover my intuition, which probably sounds a little crazy because how do you discover
Not at all.
something that you're born
Well,
with?
we're all special with something.
Yes, I'm thankfully I was able to discover it. But what I mean by that is I used to be hyper rational, hyper logical, and what I learned over time is that there's wisdom in intuition and that it comes from somewhere. So like the rational mind that you have it's an interpreter. It gives you some perspective. And it's doing its best job to interpret data, but the data is also there and it's also being interpreted by your subconscious. And that's where a lot of that data is going. And sometimes your subconscious is actually a more honest interpreter than your rational interpreter because it has some other data. It's able to like also reference emotion and just data and things that you might not even realize that you picked up. I mean, that probably happened because I think I spoke to a couple of folks and I was doing some research and I was like, this doesn't seem like it makes sense. I don't remember the exact situation, but thank you for remembering.
Yeah, well, I think what it was they were trying to get a loan that is just very uncommon here in New York.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's just something you never really see. It was like a government-funded loan for the purchase of the apartment. Just didn't it was tricky.
Yeah, it didn't sit right. And I think it's that. I think it's looking and being honest with yourself when that's happening. I think a lot of folks, they undervalue the wisdom that their intuition might bring. For me, I was hyper rational. So I read Atlas Shrugged and I was like a big objectivist and everything was like very, very, very hyper rational. And at some point I was like, wait a second, there's more to this.
Yeah.
And I had that transition and like my perspective just shifted. And a couple life events happened, but my perspective shifted and things were a lot better. I think like I now had like all this perspective that I didn't have before. And then sometimes it's just trusting that lingering feeling or thought you might have because it's not always valid. Like sometimes it's your crocodile brain just going haywire, but you should at least listen to it and consider it.
Yeah. Are there physical reactions to intuition? Like, is it the hair standing up on your arms, or is it like a feeling in the spine, or is it just a feeling of anxiety? Like what would you, maybe, I don't know if you can pinpoint it, like, is there something that you feel when you know something is not right?
Yeah, I think it's what's interesting about intuition is it's a lot more integrated than, let's say, rational thought. So why? Because it's your nervous system and then your emotions, and then sometimes it gets pushed up into your rational. But at least for me, it's usually a combination of like, okay, it's like there's anxiety or there's worry or there's even like it could translate into doubt. Where's that coming from? So it could be anxiety. It could be like, oh, what is anxiety? It could just be, it could be the hair standing up on your arms, but it's more so it's like in the back of your head, you get that feeling. But yeah, usually it's some kind of emotion that is triggering or kind of tickling there. And then you start thinking about why is that happening?
Yeah.
But it could be, like I said, it could be going haywire. So it's all about asking like, okay, or just that awareness and that level of awareness, which then gives you the benefit of saying, hey, do you want to listen to this?
Believing it.
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah,
It eventually get to the point where like when it happens enough times, and also like I love to listen to successful people to try to learn from them, and it's a pattern. Like the most successful people are generally very in touch with their intuition. They understand its limitations, but they lean into it.
Yeah. So the next question I wanted to ask you, would you consider yourself, are you familiar with the differences between the right brain and the left brain?
Yes. Well, I've become much more familiar, and I read actually the way that I got to that. It's interesting. So, I raised money for my first venture-backed company when I was 21, and I had trouble kind of raising the next round, and the pitch just was not landing. That was when I was much more logical and hyper-rational, and I read this book called Pitch Anything by Oren Klaff, great book, and
let me write that down.
Excellent book.
Pitch Anything.
Yes. So, and the whole premise was that it's like right brain versus left brain, or crocodile brain versus, let's say, like the Homo sapien brain, and then just comparing like what is it, and helping you understand those components. But yes, very much so.
So which brain are you?
I forget which one is which, but still much more rational.
The left brain is analytical,
yeah,
rational. The right brain is more creative, colorful.
Definitely left brain dominant.
Yeah.
And then I try to find a balance though, but definitely.
I'm the opposite. I'm right brain dominant. And then truthfully that it can sometimes be to my detriment. You know, I don't know if that's maybe it's a Pisces thing, but it's, you know, it's, I have a pretty wild imagination.
No, I mean, like they both have pros and cons.
Yeah.
Like I think being too rational or too logical sometimes, like it's made me rigid. So it's like just having that creative counterbalance. I think what's cool is I found like my fiance is actually a great counterbalance, and she'll give me that right brain perspective when I'm not seeing it, and I'll be like, oh, and it'll kind of help also fill in the blank. I'm like, all right, that actually kind of makes sense.
And that's a good partner. Yeah, it's the
Absolutely.
same. My wife is the same way. She like brings me down to earth sometimes, you know, or she asks the right questions that help me shift the mindset or think about it a little bit differently.
Exactly.
So on the heels of that, what would you say is your biggest strength in business? Like, what do you do better than anyone?
Be persistent. So I think I actually thought about this, and I'm like, how, you know, where do I end up fitting in? It's I have this ability to kind of analyze what the destination is, and then draw the yellow brick road to get to that destination, and then kind of keep the momentum and keep beating the drum at the pace to help get to those interim steps. I think a lot of people, they get stuck, or they fall off, or they get distracted, or it's just a multitude of things. And this normal. It's life happens. They get distracted. Like to get something going is often the hardest part. Like I think it was like, how do you start the fire? How do you get that little flame going and then grow and grow? And that's the hardest part. And that's why most people talk about 0 to 1 and kind of that phase. And a lot of folks, they don't follow like a very clear plan, or they don't stay as disciplined with it. So I think my ability to figure out, okay, what exactly needs to happen immediately next, that's been very helpful.
Yeah. Also being able to see, you said like draw the yellow brick road. Like, and I actually saw a quote on your Instagram today that said most people underestimate, or they overestimate what they can achieve in a year, and they underestimate what they can achieve in 10 years. That's a big one. I feel like we all go into the year like, oh, I'm going to do this. And that, you know, like I'm working with, I do some coaching in my world, and I'm working with a client who said, you know, yeah, my goal this year is to hit $1 million in gross commission. Okay, where are you at right now? 45,000. And we're talking about like a suburban market. So maybe $1 million in gross commission is a little heavy of a goal. I mean, I think that a goal should scare you. That's what makes it worth chasing. So the promise you make to yourself, or the contract you have with yourself, should be courageous, if you will. But at what point does it escape reality?
Well, that's the problem, because if it's too far from reality, you actually just get discouraged, and then you actually just start shutting down.
Yeah,
because you're like, it's never gonna happen. Like this is it. Like you, because the thing is, you have to believe in yourself. I read something amazing recently. It was like, there's no Olympian or athlete that's ever broken a record that deep down believed they couldn't do it.
Right.
And that was like, absolutely.
Yeah,
like,
that makes perfect sense.
Because they would subconsciously, they would have just stopped themselves.
Yeah.
Like the 4-minute mile didn't happen because someone like deep down thought it wasn't possible. They just pushed and pushed and pushed. So we've done a very similar exercise. I think it was with Juice. We started very early. Is we would set like an end of year revenue target, and then we made this formula where it's like, what is the monthly revenue growth that has to be to occur? Like, what is the growth rate? And then that would help us get to that end of year revenue target. And then how many deals do we have to close per month to actually be hitting that?
Dude, send me that spreadsheet. Let me get in on that.
Absolutely. So I think it's like if you're a client or whoever it is, if they're able to take that and be like, all right, currently I'm closing X number, and then like it's here's the number of leads that are coming in, and these leads, like let's say they're seller leads, like they're coming in, I'm able to close this percentage so far, and that's going to improve at least a little bit, right? So we need this many leads, because ultimately what's it going to take? Probably seller leads in that specific scenario, and then at what rate does that have to grow? And then because for that to occur, you kind of have to be closing many more like different quarters from now. But it is doable, but that would be really impressive. That would be really, really big.
Have you been able to put away money and cash in doing what you do, or are you constantly reinvesting?
No, I have. I try to like.
You're not doing like an Elon Musk thing where you just like put it all, every dollar into the next thing.
I don't think I have that opportunity. Like, I think that the opportunities I've had so far, even if I wanted to, I either don't have enough money or they don't make sense. Like, I think that, for example, with Juice, we've made a lot of investments, and thankfully many have worked out, many have not worked out. But I don't even, like I say, I wanted to put more money in. I don't know where I would put that much more. Like, we invest a lot every year, but yeah, I think it's also really important to have a foundation and a cushion.
Yeah,
because it's freeing.
Yeah, for sure.
The perspective also I've gained in the last decade is like, I can think a lot more clearly because I have a foundation. And it's like, you always put your oxygen mask on first before helping others.
Yeah.
That extends to a lot of life.
Well, my advice to you as you become a married man and look to have children is to keep building that cushion and don't touch it.
Yeah. No,
don't touch that cushion. So let me ask you this: do you think that entrepreneurship is teachable?
Well, I would break it out into two categories or segments. Like, what is entrepreneurship? It's mindset and it's skill set, right? I don't think mindset is teachable, period. Like, I just don't. And that's very rigid. I mean, I'd say there's one exception. If you have some really, really, really strong emotional event, because I truly believe the only way to change the subconscious mind is like through emotion. So you have to have either a traumatic event or something that's insanely emotional that just gets you to your core. Your mindset could shift. But more importantly, you can't change, or I firmly believe I can't change anyone's mindset. They can only change themselves, and they have to really want it. And usually that's an emotional want. So that could change. So let's start with mindset. And the skill sets are definitely teachable. But again, that usually the mindset is the precursor there, because someone has to be willing, able, and open to learning it. Like, I am self-taught in many things. I'm self-taught in how to code, in how to do design, in Photoshop. I've taught myself, I don't know, recently I taught myself prompt engineering. Like, I love it. Like, I figured out how to use AI as an extension of myself. It generates a lot of content. It writes a lot of content for me. Like, most of my content I put out is AI written, and of course I edit it, and like, they're my ideas, but I'm putting it out. That was like a new challenge I set for myself. I'm like, how do I scale this? I don't have that much time. Let me kind of put myself in a box and learn that skill set.
Yeah.
I feel like I've learned sales. Like, there's a lot of people that will argue, especially actually in real estate. They're like, no, you can't learn sales. Like, it's an innate trait.
Wrong.
I think I learned it. I've read a lot of books. I had to learn how to be an extrovert. Like, I used to be an introvert. I used to not be able to like speak to people. And now I think I can be fairly convincing, and I'm convinced it's because I read so many books and I had so much practice and I put myself out there, and I got rejected so many times over and over and over again. But then I learned from it. Like, at some point it was discouraging, and then I was able to reframe it and learn from it. So long story short, mindset, no, but skill set, yes.
I feel like I related a lot to this little rant you just went on, because I also am self-taught in pretty much everything I do. I taught myself how to edit video and how to do Photoshop and Illustrator. You know, before I joined Sirhan, I was like doing everything, all my marketing work, completely and entirely by myself. You know, and it was very hard for me to surrender that skill set to someone else. And it was actually Casey Neistat who told me that. He asked me, he's like, do you edit all your own videos? I said, yes, I do. And he said, me too. And I'll never be able to not do that, because it's very difficult to surrender that skill set to someone else. Like, nobody can tell the story the way you can tell the story, the way you see it in your mind.
Well, it's art, right? For you, it's a mode of expression. It's a mode of art. So I could see that, because when you're editing, it's kind of like you're putting together that art, that narrative arc. It's like, it's the story that's being told. And I mean, yeah, I think that what I realized also is that I'm a tinkerer, which I like to tinker, and I learn by doing or learn by tinkering. So
I'm the same. I love trying new things, messing with things, learning new things. Even like during COVID, I became a master bread maker. You know, just like,
that's awesome.
Yeah, just like random stuff like that.
Yep.
It really gets me going. I always have like big ideas, and obviously, you know, the only real important thing is the execution behind those ideas. But I'm always like toying and tinkering with new things as well.
No, for sure. I think that's like for me. I don't know how I was a quiet kid and I didn't play any sports, which left computers. So I built my first computer when I was 12.
Wow.
Which is crazy. I know, and I think back, I'm like, that's crazy. And that was kind of the tinkering. It was like I just figured it out. I read about it. I read online. And then that led to like learning some software tools. Like I learned Photoshop when I was probably 14 or 15 just to like be on forums and play with signatures and stuff.
Yeah.
So
forged documents.
Yeah, well, just a couple of report cards. That's a great side hustle. But it's interesting. Like talk about mindset and skill set. Like if you can, like I think about this. I'm like, I would love for my kids, if not to be entrepreneurs, but entrepreneurial. What does that mean? It's like instill this idea of tinkering.
Yeah.
Because if anything, if you can get them to at least appreciate tinkering, it just opens up their world.
Tinker away. I love that. I used to be an introvert too. In fact, I'm still introverted in some contexts. Like I can work a room, but I like if you find me at a wedding, like you'll find me by the bar or by the buffet. So like this is the context in which I'm more extroverted and I'm more open. But for some reason in a big room, in a larger setting, I'm a little bit more introverted, unless it's like a room surrounded by family.
I'm the same way. It's funny. I feel like sometimes people are like, oh, wow, they can't be. And I feel like I have people fold sometimes. I'm like, no, I mean.
I get that too.
And sometimes I have to almost reconcile these realities of like the version of me that was and the version of me that is today.
Okay, so this is where you and I actually have something in common. I feel like we have a few things in common, but this is like a core thing that I think we both have in common. And you tell me if you're uncomfortable talking about this. But I think we both spent a period of our life overweight. That for me certainly had a heavy personal effect on my life. I think that's a big reason why there was an introverted nature built into me. There was a period in time where I was over 300 pounds and I lost about 80 pounds going to a nutritionist, and that totally changed my mindset. It also changed my relationship with food. I used to eat for comfort, and then I really fell in love with food and started to get really into it and cooking and all that stuff. Yeah, I know, it's the best. And then eventually you get married, and gradually that weight comes back, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, maybe I hope it doesn't. Maybe I should do Manjaro or Ozempic or one of those. Yeah. So you start to like tinker with that. But you mentioned to me once that you also went through a period in your life where you were overweight. How do you think that affected your mindset, or do you think that contributed to the fact that you're an introvert to this day?
Almost certainly. It affected my mindset a lot. I mean, both negatively and positively. Yeah. But starting with the positive, it was interesting because we talked about locus of control. We talked about or really agency, and then I talk about like locus of control, which is, do you feel like things are within your control or without your control? And the biggest change that happened with losing, I didn't lose nearly as much weight as you. That's very impressive. But I think for me it was like 60 pounds or something, peak to trough.
That's pretty impressive.
I mean, it was life-changing.
I'm taller than you.
It was life-changing. It was completely life-changing. Yeah. But it shifted my mindset, and I was like, whoa, I could change so much about myself. Like, what else is possible? And what it did is it took like the realm of possibility and just expanded it. Yeah, and I was like, wow. And that created this really interesting and cool positive momentum that ended up translating to many, many other parts of my life. And I mean, to this day, I'm still going to the gym 4 or 5 days a week. Yeah. Like it's commitment. I mean, that's oscillated over time.
You never want to go back.
No. And I feel like it's such a powerful anchor habit. Like how do you start your day and get some kind of win or feel good about yourself? And like, I try to do it in the morning first thing, as many days as possible.
What time?
And I've tried the 6 a.m. thing. So I would get up 5:45. I did this for a year straight. 5:45, gym at 6, done at 7, and I couldn't go to sleep on time. So for a year, I was just getting like 5 hours of sleep.
Yeah, you were just tired all the time.
Yes, and I was like, I'm just gonna stop fighting it and not do that. So nowadays, I'm usually at the gym at 8, so 8 to 9. Get back, get ready, and then start getting into my day. And that's worked pretty well.
I like to, and I've heard Jeff Bezos say this as well, but I like to putter in the morning. I like to take a little time in the morning, have my coffee, spend a little time with my girls. I work out early. I work out at 5:30, but when I get home, my girls are just coming out of the cribs. So, and I like to just take my time. I feel like for me, it's important. The morning is like my moment of calm before I reach my day. Because all I really do is work, eat, and sleep. Yeah, so the morning is just like where I have some solace.
For sure. Actually, that was the best part about starting my day at 7, or let's call it 7:20, was that initial hour. It was just quiet.
Yeah.
That was so amazing. It was just like, it was quiet. I was kind of getting going, and there's this ability to think, just like this quiet. So it's been a little bit more hectic not being up that early, but for me, I end up working kind of late. So that's quiet for me is usually after like business hours, where it's just me, and let's say like employees aren't really pinging me, and those are just my hours. It's a little bit easier.
Yeah. I'll cut this if you want me to, but can I ask you questions about cannabis and smoking weed?
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
All right. I watched a TikTok last night that really made me laugh. And it was this girl laying in bed, and she goes, "It's been 3 days since I stopped smoking weed, and I have terrible news." She goes, "I feel so much better." And I was cracking up.
Yeah,
I was cracking up. Now I do remember that when I showed your apartment one time, I like was showing someone the pull out pantry, and like a big stack of like bags of edibles fell out of the pantry. So, and like one time I did a showing, and like you left all your shit out on the counter.
Amazing.
So
you're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I thought about it more than once, like maybe just sneaking one in there, but I didn't. I really know that, and that took some discipline. But I have actually always found that cannabis has really opened up the airwaves for me creatively. Do you find benefit in it still? Do you still do it?
Yeah, less so now. Like it comes in waves. I think the issue for me was at some point I was smoking pretty often because my mind is always going.
Yeah.
And I found it was a way to like shift into lower gear and just chill out. But then that becomes like a cycle, and then that joke that you made, I felt like if I do it too often, I become a little bit slower.
Yeah.
So I think it's the also cliche is everything in moderation.
Yes.
Big fan, but in moderation. I think
Me
that's
too.
I think that's been the biggest change for me. Is just like just becoming, it's like that level of self-awareness of like, all right, cool, like I like it, I enjoy it, but if I do it too often,
yeah. Because if you do it in moderation, you can still do it and be dialed in. You can, and it really can open up.
And it helps with creativity a lot. Like creativity 100%. and it's all about perspective.
Yeah, 100%. Like there have been times where like at the end of my day, if I have a smoke, and then all of a sudden, like I am like ripping into my calendar and structuring my entire day, and everything's coming to the surface. Like all the thoughts are coming to the surface.
Yep.
Even if like there could have been time in the day where I felt stuck or unproductive, and it just totally opens you up.
Yeah. No, it's true.
I'm sure people ask you for advice all the time, given your history. Like, I get LinkedIn messages all the time from people who are curious about real estate. Is there a singular or one piece of advice you give to all aspiring entrepreneurs?
I don't know if it's one piece. I actually try to be careful in the advice that I give. Like I think that what people don't realize is that advice needs to be qualified. I'm actually in the school of thought that you need to earn the ability to have an opinion. Like I don't think everyone should have an opinion. I think that,
I like that.
You should go and have to do some research, or like just there needs to be some base level before you can be like, I have an opinion. And I think the same applies to advice. Yeah. I think that a lot of like the problem is that, so I've had this, thankfully I've had positive experiences. Like I've given some advice, and actually somebody now I'm friends with him. Like this guy, I met him at a conference. I was mentoring at this conference, and I very politely told him that he was not working on a good idea, and I kind of like helped him understand why. And I think it was a year or two later, he ended up dropping it, and he was so happy. He was so thankful and grateful. He's like, oh my God, I'm so, like, no one told me, like, thank you for telling me. And then it opened up all these amazing opportunities for him that thing maybe wasn't the right path with. But I try to be very careful, because the counterpoint to advice is people listen. And like it really affects people. So I don't think there's this one cliche in terms of advice. I mean, really, it's a lot of it's perspective.
Yeah.
I know I keep saying that, but it really is, and that kind of it's mindset. And for a lot of people, actually, somebody asked me recently, they're in a corporate job and they really want to be doing their own thing. They want to be doing it, but they don't really want to give up the level of income they have.
Yeah, it's comfortable.
And like the advice there is easy. It's like, well, this is not for you.
Like, it's not comfortable.
This is not going to work. Because like when I was starting Even Juice, for example, first we didn't pay ourselves, and we paid ourselves very little. It was like $40,000, whatever. it was not enough to survive in New York City.
No.
Because at that point we were reinvesting every dollar and then some into the business. So I think I try not to actually give very generic advice. I try to be very, very careful when I do give it.
It's interesting. I find that when people ask me advice about real estate, most often I tell them don't do it. Yeah, it's kind of like someone who wants to convert to Judaism, like the rabbi's supposed to talk them out of it.
Yeah.
I try to like talk people out of getting into real estate because it's painful. It's a painful business to be in.
It is painful. I think people don't realize. Like I said, they see that highlight reel, they see all the wins, and it's like that visual. You ever see like the duck floating on water?
Yeah.
And like it looks all serene and amazing, and then under the water, it's like flapping like crazy just to stay afloat.
Yeah.
That applies to real estate. It applies to entrepreneurship. Like it's like when you're only seeing a piece of it, and usually there's a lot more underneath, and there's a lot more context.
Yeah. What would you say is the biggest financial mistake you ever made?
So many. Where to begin? It depends. Like I've unfortunately made bad investments, but I think that kind of comes with the territory. I'm actually pretty conservative, but I feel like sometimes when I get into things, it's a little bit late. So because I can be hesitant, like on the investing side, I can be a little bit hesitant. So like certain crypto or whatever it is, the biggest financial mistake, if I have to pinpoint one, I was a massive Bitcoin bull in 2008. Because so like to take a step back, I was
what
like,
price did you sell at?
It's not even that. It's like so I found Bitcoin on Reddit in like 2009-ish, like right in the beginning. And I was like very, very libertarian at the time. I was like super duper libertarian. I was like, oh my God, this is the future. This is internet gold. And I was like mentally all in. But I didn't really have any money. I was 18. I was broke. Like I was working at Staples making $7.85 an hour. Like I didn't have any money.
I know you worked at Staples. That's cool.
First job fixing computers, $7.85 an hour. But I didn't have any money that I would feel comfortable even like risking at the time. So I didn't do it. I set up a couple miners. Like I was actually working also at a bathroom supply store, and I set up a miner on the computer there. And then one of my best friends that I work with now would come in every day and be like, the computer is slow, and turn it off. Or I set up like there's something called an ASIC miner also in like 2011. And I set it up in my parents' office. And my dad's like, this is loud. And he would just unplug it every day. So I feel like if I was just a little more persistent, I'd be in great shape. But I think the lesson there is just like I had so much conviction in something, and I didn't really follow through on it. And I think it's there. It's like to your point on intuition and all that feeling. Like if you're really, 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 really sure about something, you need to at least try. And like I feel like I didn't try enough, and that would have been life changing had I done that.
What do you think is the impact that AI will have on entrepreneurs in the coming years?
Massive impact. I think people talk about it, also cliche. It's like it's too easy to downplay it, and I think a lot of people still haven't. The switch hasn't clicked. Like I went from mega skeptic to I'm like fully bought in.
Yeah.
And I think my skepticism came from things like Siri, because I was like, oh, Siri's terrible,
like
and
listening in on me.
No, it's just like it was so bad. It was so bad at understanding what you're trying to say, and it was so bad at generating a response. And it was like you would have to repeat yourself 10 times. It was so much easier and faster to just type it.
Well, yeah, when I was doing research for this podcast, I went into Instagram, into the Meta AI search, and I just said, who is Mike Lisovetsky? And it gave me all the bullet points.
No way.
Yeah.
That's super cool. So that's an example. And I think people, because they've kind of been trained a little bit to not realize the value of some of these tools, I think they're undervaluing how powerful it really is. So with AI, Google, when Google was like the 9th or 11th or whatever search engine, it took a little bit. It wasn't the first. There was like Ask Jeeves and all these other ones that started out first. So also like Google faced skepticism because a lot of the first search engines were not easily usable, and they weren't delivering that experience. AI is experiencing something very similar, where it is actually growing at an exponential rate, and it's improving at an exponential rate. Humans are really bad with exponents. Like our brains, whether it's the way time passes or progress or whatever it is, very linear. Like our brains are very linear, so it's very hard to really understand. Like that's the whole what can change over a decade versus a year. Like you significantly undervalue that exponential curve. So AI is finally hit that point where it's expanding so rapidly. What does that actually mean? Like people always use these words, like it's going. It's with Google. you were able to outsource knowledge and just information. With AI, you can outsource thinking. That's a great
quote.
Thank you. I mean, you kind of have to try it and feel it to believe it.
Yeah.
Like I said, I was a mega skeptic. My fiance a couple years ago, she's like, what if there was a tool where you just typed in the type of website that you needed for your business and it would just make one for you?
Yeah, I think I saw a TikTok video of a guy who asked ChatGPT, what's the fastest way I can build a business? And it literally gave him the outline, and he started a drop shipping business from that outline.
Yep. And what's interesting, like, so I told her, no, that's stupid. Like, this is the dumbest thing ever. It's not possible. And I started listing off all the reasons why it's not possible and kind of thinking about it. I was like, and now it exists. And I was like, I was wrong. I was very wrong. Like, that, I was so off. And that was only 2 years ago. And it's the advancements have been so rapid. The reason is because the thing about how AI works, like, it actually took me a second to realize, is AI adds it's like a little score, like a little tag. And let's say you have a paragraph. So every single word in that paragraph has a tag, like ABC 1 2 3 da, 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 da. And what they're doing, what these big models are doing when they're thinking, quote unquote, is they're identifying the relationship between the tags and then how often they occur. And when you do this enough times, you're actually training the robot how to think, because it's looking for like every single instance of these words being connected together and how many times are they connected. And what's really interesting is it looks like context. So again, Google is just the dumping of information from the internet, just the websites, and AI is able to bring context. So you can ask it really, really thorough questions. Now, for now, we have hallucinations and it makes mistakes and it sounds a little robotic. But first of all, we've kind of only been playing with the live version for a year.
Yeah,
it's brand new.
It's a baby.
So if you just think about what's going to happen in 2 or 3 years, it's insane. And then to answer your question, to kind of bring it back, like, the biggest difference is in the output per person. And I kind of think of it as an Iron Man suit. Like, for people like you and I that are tinkers and self-starters, whatever, think about how much we can now scale ourselves. And let's say you have a team of these types of people. You've now scaled yourself 5 or 10x. Because now, like, you've bolted on additional skill sets, or you've learned skill sets in half the time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because now you have this extension of you that is a computer that is also thinking for you, not just getting you information. So it's a complete game changer. And then, like, practically the implication is smaller teams. Like, smaller teams achieving more efficiency.
Yeah.
Across everything. I think the public markets are finally starting to realize that AI is actually bad for a lot of these companies, because, like, it's going to be harder to generate revenue when AI is replacing some of the value that some of these software companies are generating.
Well, I heard something interesting that I tend to agree with, is that AI is not going to replace humans, but it will replace the ones that don't use it.
100%.
You know?
Yeah. It's going to become required. And actually, the thought that I had recently is how, when I was growing up, it felt like there was a gap forming between the education system and life. Like, the life that you have when you're done with said education system. And what AI is going to do is actually wedge it further and further and further. So the problem is, like, the current education system doesn't account for these types of things. Like, you haven't had to know a lot of the things that you're taught in school for a long time, at least at the depth that you have to know them, because the information is easily accessible. It's like right there. And now it's like, okay, what is the implication of a computer thinking for you? So you have to learn how to think, but you also have to learn how to teach the computer to think, because now you can think at like 10x the scale.
Yeah, that's a really good insight. I feel like I'm going to listen to that one a few times. I'm going to listen to it back. Will you ever move back to New York?
Maybe. I miss it. I mean,
we'd love to have you.
I love it. It's infectious, but I don't know. I think life has been phases. For me though, I miss being near family. That's a big one, especially with kids in the future, and so much easier. But Miami's been fun. I think Miami's just been so much more open-minded and business friendly.
Yeah.
And that's been refreshing. Like, it's a completely different perspective where business is welcomed, and
they don't want you to make money here.
Yeah. No, but here it feels like there's every impediment and everything is standing in your way. And then, I mean, the crazy protests once in a while, like, it doesn't, I don't even know what their end goal is. It doesn't really make sense to me, but
well, they want to see Jews wiped off the face of the earth.
Which is crazy.
Yeah. All right, I have one more question for you. If you could ask God one question, what would it be?
It's a great question.
I know.
Figure. What would it be? My mind is going towards this, like, it's not necessarily what for or what's the meaning, but it's the greater context. It's like, okay, people are on Earth, no matter your level of how religious you are, no one knows why we're here. Their ideas, their interpretations. It's like, there's this idea of like the soul being part of a body and how body's just a carrier and all these things. And if souls do live on, like, why and where and how, and like I would want to know if let's say, assuming souls live on, like how does that work? Like what more is there to it? The other part of it is like there's probably more in terms of perspective. Like our brains are just interpretation machines. There are actually noises happening around us. There's everything that's happening around us, and we're tweaked to a certain frequency of interpretation. So what else is there that we're missing?
Yeah. I think we are meant to believe in reincarnation to some degree. There are some souls that are reincarnated, but there are some that don't have to be. There are some that have served their purpose, and then they move on to that Garden of Eden. Yeah. But that was an interesting answer. Well, this was a pleasure. This is
Thank
good.
you.
This is good. This is
Thank
very
you,
insightful. I think that a lot of people listening to this will get a lot of value from this, from your words. You're very knowledgeable, my friend.
Thank you.
31 years old, you've accomplished a lot, and you're just getting started at 31.
Absolutely.
You have so much time ahead of you, so I know you're going to crush it, and I look forward to you being a client again. Come back to New York. We miss you.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. That's cool.